All right, so short of making a video on golf this week, I am changing contracts again this week, and for the next month or so, I will be working in my hometown of Washington, D.C., where I have played just about every freaking public course in the area many times. So I am not making a video because I don't want to review a course I've already reviewed. And while I'm looking for courses that I have not reviewed yet that are in the DC area, I am going to put in a couple of filler videos. And this one I've had in mind for a while. It's been slowly building over the many hours of golf that I've been playing. But something happened recently that precipitated this video, and I was going to make it anyway. So there are a few. Let's get back to the social issues at hand, and I think I'm going to say a short note. I'd like to make a short shout out to Greg Ballard. Let me pull this guy's video up real quick. If I can, at Top Speed Golf. And having played some of the courses that I've played before here in the area, played for years in some cases, and found myself struggling on these courses. Mainly, number one, by pulling shots left or right into the woods, blocking or pushing or whatever you want to call it, or pulling these shots into the woods. I have learned something from his site, which has dramatically affected my ability to hit the ball in the play and also get good distance. And I'm not quite the world's most consistent golfer yet, but I still find myself able to play courses now and basically not lose balls when I play, number one. And second, to basically get good, consistent, I won't even say great, but I'll say good and consistent, certainly serviceable shots on probably 90% of the shots that I take. I'm still having a little back slipping now and then. Sometimes I don't quite get a good shot, but at least it's not going in the woods. So I am definitely going to say that this guy's teachings on his website are a definite plus and should definitely be checked out if you're a struggling, aspiring golfer. Let's see, where is this here? Here we go. Yeah, Clay Ballard, Top Speed Golf. You definitely want to check that out. Now, he has a lot of videos out. He's putting out a lot of videos this year compared to last year. But I would say basically you want to look at the stuff that he has put on about hip turns, about definitely hip turns, definitely lag, and definitely learning how to hit good solid drives under control, reliable drives under control, and how to get irons off the fairway. It's pretty easy to hit irons out rough. It's a matter of just picking what loft club you're going to use versus the thickness of the rough and the way the ball's sitting up in the rough. Most people can hit balls out of the rough fairly easily, depending on how far down it is in the rough and how thick the rough is. But hitting shots off the fairway is a very tricky game. It's very easy to miss-hit fairway shots, especially when you have a fairway shot and you have a long shot to a green. You want to hit the most distance you can get out of the shot. And the problem with hitting or trying for distance, really trying for distance, is that it's so easy to overswing and just get a bad contact. And what this guy teaches on his website is, on his page, YouTube page, is all about getting good contact and all about keeping the ball under control. And one of the benefits of doing that, side benefit of us, is you get really good distance with these techniques. You get really good contact and good distance almost effortlessly. And it is just another example of the overriding theory that often in golf, the best success comes from not trying too hard. from just not trying too hard and getting good contact. So I definitely want to thank that guy for the videos that he's put out. So let's get back to the point. So there are a few things, two things that I've been really kind of rolling around in my head, and I think this last issue really kind of summarizes it. The first is this ridiculousness about cultural appropriation. Okay, I keep seeing these videos every now and then about blacks complaining about white people who, you know, indulge in African culture or Latin culture or whatever. I think it's just ridiculous. And I'm going to say this one time and short and sweet. I think it's ridiculous for people who live in the United States and enjoy all the benefits of European technology and culture to sit around on the internet and give people shit because they wear an African dress or they listen to African music or whatever and they're not African. You're just missing the whole damn story. Okay, it's just that simple. And one of the things that really undercuts a lot of the arguments that culturalists want to make is that they're so ridiculously hypocritical in so many ways. And I'm not saying they're always hypocritical, but still often they can be seriously hypocritical. But the problem is that hypocrisy comes from European culture. It's hard to really differentiate the negative effects of European culture from the positive effects, because what are the positive effects? Well, the positive effects are things that people do for themselves. And the problem is that when people tend to do things for themselves, they often tend to look at the world in a way which is, let's just say, beneficial for them. And that gets me into this whole issue of white privilege, which, and I can't seriously consider people who deny white privilege while benefiting from it. One of the reasons they do benefit from it is because whites in this country are taken more seriously than non-whites. It's very simple. It's a very simple, basic fact. And blacks in general have a lack of credibility. But there's no greater example of white privilege. I really think there isn't. And the issue of hypocrisy and the issue of self-beneficial logic, then this decision about cohabitation and alimony that just popped up out of Canada. I want to read this story because it's just mind-bending, this story. So the basic story is, and I think you can Google it, basically find this, but couple has no home or kids together, but still considered spouses. Ontario's top court rules. Now this is a review. This is a upper court review of a lower court case in which a gentleman in Toronto, a wealthy businessman, who was involved in a relationship with this other white Canadian, and they're both white, and this is definitely a woman that's bringing this case, and won the case for spousal support from a guy she refused to actually marry. And they dated for years. They dated for a long time. And in the lower court, she won lifetime alimony from this guy. Okay? Lifetime alimony. They dated for years. They certainly cohabitated in many ways for years. They would often go on vacations together. But she maintained her own residence. He maintained his own residence. And after a while, she quit her job and moved in with him for a while. And she would, well, I was wrong. Let's see, it says, let me just read. This is one reason I'm reading it. Although they maintained their separate homes, the two people involved behaved as a couple both privately and publicly. They vacationed together. He gave her a 7.5 carat diamond ring and other jewelry that she wore. She quit her job and would regularly sleep at his house. They traveled together and they talked about living together. So here's the meat of the story. The guy proposed to her several times and the woman accepted. He often referred to her by his last name. However, he insisted that she sign a marriage contract and came up with several drafts. She refused to sign any of these drafts. Throughout the relationship, they kept separate bank accounts, never owned property in common. Nevertheless, the man gave the woman thousands of dollars every month, a credit card, paid off her mortgage, and showered her with expensive gifts. He provided her and her children with a lavish lifestyle. This was a committed relationship. Both the lower court and the appeals court agreed on that. The only real correction the upper court made to the decision of the lower court was to change the date by which they considered them actually spouses. Okay? That this changed the calculation of how long he should pay alimony or support. The problem is that they never were officially married. Okay? Now, on the other hand, common law marriage is a pretty common thing. But the thing that really strikes me that's so surprising about this is how liberal the interpretation of living or cohabitation is. And I think this is something that every person in this country, every person in the world should consider. They never actually lived together continuously for 3 years. And that was the real issue, aside from the fact that it's a 3-year period in Ontario, apparently, as opposed to, say, 6 years or whatever, which it is in a lot of places. In DC, it's 6 years. So the point is, they didn't live together continuously. Even though sometimes she stayed at his place, sometimes he stayed at her place, they didn't live together continuously for 3 years. Okay? The issue of how many diamonds he gave her, or how much money he gave her, or what he paid for her, or all that kind of stuff, have nothing to do with that. The point is that they're simply saying they were in a committed relationship for a long time. Therefore, they meet what the court considers the standards to be for a continuous conjugal relationship, which they consider to be sufficient justification for this guy to continue supporting this woman even though they have broken up and want to go their separate ways. The guy's basically trying to break it off and end it and just move on in his life, okay? Yes, he gave her a lot of gifts. Yes, they spent a lot of time together, but they never actually got married. It's like, well, okay, so what are the actual standards for which one person in a relationship can ask for financial support from the other person in a relationship? And the problem is that these standards keep slipping. They keep getting more and more and more liberal. But even worse, the problem is that there is law about marriage. There's long-standing law about marriage, okay? And the definitions and the criteria for marriage and alimony and support keep slipping and slipping and slipping and slipping in favor of white women. I mean, it's a simple, clear issue. It's not men that are applying for alimony from women and finding that the courts are more liberal and more sympathetic to their position and deciding that women need to give men $50,000 a month in spousal support years after the woman has broken up with him, or years after they've broken up because they couldn't come to terms on marriage, okay? It's women that are benefiting from these things. The whole idea of divorce in the first place was to benefit women. It's just like the right to vote was to benefit women. People are benefiting from these rights that they're getting from the courts as much as they're getting it from the legislature. And the problem is, I think it's virtually impossible for the courts to actually abide by the law and by precedent when there is a clear penalty, relatively speaking, to the plaintiff as a result. They can't actually say, well, this is the law, This is clear precedent. This is how the world works, and you just have to live with it. And the problem is, if that's the rule, if that is the overriding rule, that the courts are always going to at least weigh in the consequences of not deciding in the plaintiff's favor versus the law, versus clear precedent, versus decades, even hundreds of years of historical precedent, then what are they doing here? Okay, they're not adjudicating the law and making decisions of in civil cases or even in criminal cases based on the law. They're adjudicating the law based on the consequences to one side or the other, depending on which side they want to favor. And the problem with this is that this totally flips our country on its head from a country of law and order and blind justice, okay, to a country of favoritism. So the question is, how do we ever look at ourselves and deny that cultural privileges play a large role in this? Let's just leave the racial aspect out of it. Let's leave racism out of it. How do we deny that it's a question of cultural privilege as much as anything else? And a simple case of taking from one to give to the other because someone thinks that's the right thing to do. Not because someone thinks it, but because judges in our highest courts think that's the right thing to do. Okay? When you have the law on one hand very clearly stating what the conditions for marriage are, and then you decide that all these other things are marriage too, then don't follow, don't meet the conditions of the law, what is that doing? It's bending the law in favor of one group versus another. Everyone in this country is supposed to be, bound by law. We're supposed to follow the law. But the problem is, when we come to court, we often find that the very system, the very institution, which is supposed to protect us equally under the law, does not do so. It's so highly biased. Now, this is to me the real definition of white privilege. It's when you can't be treated fairly simply because of your race. When you're always suffering from the consequences of the fact that you're black instead of white, that's clear white privilege. Okay, now maybe white people don't see that as a clear benefit to them, but I think that's largely because they're so damn used to it. It's just, they just take it for granted. Whereas blacks in this country are routinely reminded of the fact that they're not white and are routinely put back in their place, both by blacks and by whites, for that reason. It's the most basic form of criticism of blacks is that they act and think that they're white when they're not. And they're constantly reminded of that when that becomes an issue. So to say, as some quote unquote Arab scholar has said, Pakistani scholar has said, that there's no such thing as white privilege is in and of itself a matter of privilege. To say that there is no racism or they're not racism is in of itself a question of racism, in a sense that it takes a certain mentality to deny the existence of something else through an entire culture. It takes a lot from one person to say that there is nothing like what millions of people through thousands of years have complained about. To just deny that it exists takes a certain mentality. And to me, it's just one of the things that minorities have to deal with in this country all the time. Simply not being taken seriously. Simply having what they say with their opinions simply dismissed, outright dismissed, despite millions of people dealing with this on a regular basis. So I think that there's no way that this culture is really going to move forward while that happens, okay? It's like being in the Roman times where if you were a slave, they could do whatever they wanted to with you, And as a slave, you couldn't complain about it. When a slave complained about things, their complaints were instantly dismissed because slaves had no right to complain. It's a new form of that, but still the same thing. I have to add one more thing. Just one other little detail I forgot about during all of that. This other story I wanted to comment on. And I want to comment on it because it's interesting that so many women have made claims like this, but it seems like it has been a while since these claims were made. You can talk about the cancel culture, for instance. Male actors in Hollywood, our media stars in other areas, have been suffering this rash of accusations that have led to what some would say wiping out an entire body of work based on 5 minutes of their life. I forgot exactly who said that. Maybe it was the guy from, what was his name? I forget his name. Anyway, famous TV actor who has been accused of some act or another, some kind of sexual assault or something. And it's not just one actor. I remember saying this. I can't remember the names off the top of my head. But the whole cancer culture concept is essentially that we should shun people for their actions, including their views, including their expressed views, whether they're political views or environmental views or social views or economic views. That whole range of activity is essentially a form of elitism. And it's interesting to see how people justify having everyone shun someone or not go to see their movies or not listen to their albums or whatever, based upon some one concept that they've done. Say, there are people who voted and argued against voting for Donald Trump because he came out with a statement saying that he can go into a beauty pageant and grab women by the pussy. That's one statement. Now, what that statement says to you, what that statement means to you, these are all different things. But basically, that's the cancel culture we live in today. And I'm somewhat leery of even publishing this video for that very reason. But the problem is that silencing dissent and silencing the voices for change is one of the reasons why there isn't change. And in fact, things actually get worse. So I would call this my moment of American heroism to publish this video. We need to have a understanding of how these forces work together, because people are suffering real damage in their lives and it's having real consequence. Now, I want to say that the basic problem with racism, it is a form of elitism as much as anything else. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just racism. It can be elitism and manifest itself in many different ways. But the basic problem is people in this society don't do well when they're isolated from society. They're marginalized. And we all need a certain amount of social interaction to succeed, to reach our potential in our lives. It's hard to see how people who were marginalized historically because of their race can do well and succeed in this society where they are 10, 13% of the population, but only 5% of college students and 3% of college graduates and 1% of the people with incomes over, say, $100,000 or $200,000. Now, we have arguments back and forth about why that is, but I can't avoid the fact that it's circular. At some point, accusing blacks of being failures in our society simply because they're black and therefore not successful because of inherent limitations in the fact that they're black, it looks at one side of the story but not the other side of the story. How much have non-blacks contributed to that failure? That's the question. We don't have a society of people who want to admit their failures and their actions because of the obvious consequences thereof. One of the problems with being a social person is this tendency to want to impress the public. I mean, like I said, it all circulates around. So this case actually strikes me on a number of different levels. This British actress who claimed that she was raped by a good friend and suffered severe trauma emotionally, as well as, I guess, some trauma physically, because it was a good friend who betrayed his friendship with her and raped her. And then, of course, there's more to the story in that she says she told a good friend of hers, a female friend, about it the next day or something like that. But the friend refused to back up her story when she went to the police. Now, how elitist is it to be told by one of your friends that another one of your friends has raped her, and then you get involved with him anyway and refuse to testify for your friend, for the woman who's supposed to be your friend, against your boyfriend or whatever, who she claims raped her. This is undoubtedly one of the most twisted cases of victim shaming. And what's the other phrase I was looking for? The phrase I was looking for, which was the victim culture. Okay. Now she has to ask the question of whether she believes her friend that this guy raped her, or whether she cares more about the guy than the woman he supposedly raped. And also herself for being romantically involved and for being friends with the guy in the first place. Now, so there's a very interesting three-sided argument to this. There's the guy, whether or not he raped her or not, he's not going to get a chance to defend himself, and all the other guys that are friends with her at the time, who are going to be accused by proximity, let's say, a phenomenon that black men are very familiar with, okay? Not saying that black men don't ever commit crimes, not saying that black men don't ever cause trouble, but certainly when someone sends out an APB saying black men wearing this color pants and that color jeans or whatever, and please stop every black man who's might possibly fit that description in the area. I've personally experienced this myself. I mean, it's just really kind of a weird thing when you're detained by the police because you're in the same town as someone who has been accused of committing a crime. Okay, you're walking down the street, minding your own business. You know, your brain is on something, one thing or another. The next thing you know, a cop pulls up next to you, starts to ask you a bunch of questions, and then the next thing you know, they want to hold you and then have 2 or 3 other cop cars come over, pull you over, and you're looking at going to jail simply because someone thinks that someone who is black committed a crime. Okay, call the police, and you got caught in the net. I mean, it's literally, you got caught in the net. That's what it's like. And so it's not like I'm talking about this in a hypothetical or in the abstract. I've actually been in that situation at least once in my life. So the thing is that we have to understand that there are people who are victims of crimes, but there are also people who want to be seen as victims of crimes just for the publicity, just for the attention. And there's a very large number of people who, as this person says in this article, want to profit from being seen as victims of crimes, just as there are people who want to profit from committing crimes. But the real problem is the perception of trust and respect and credibility that people have when they walk into a courtroom and, it's a white woman bringing a charge or making the accusation versus it's a black guy making a charge or bringing the accusation or being accused or whatever, versus a white man versus a black woman. Asians, Latinos. It's simply not true that people's race or culture is not considered in that decision of who's credible and who isn't credible. And the police know this. Okay? They know because they go to court for all the cases that are brought, where all the charges are made, where there's a victim and where there's a defendant. They know how this plays out in court. And that goes into the way they interact with the public. Okay? I have more than enough personal experience, and I won't go into great detail about it, more than enough personal experience to know that the police are heavily biased against black men. Heavily. Okay? There's no question in my mind about it. None. Zero. Okay? And the fact of the matter is that black men in this country just aren't taken seriously when they make complaints, but they are taken hyper seriously when somebody else complains about them. Okay? So my question is, how do you deal with that in a situation where no blacks are involved? Okay? But sex is involved, where it's a woman versus a man. And when men are defended by other women, when someone tells them, when a woman says to them, this guy raped me, and your supposed friend won't even testify that you told her, whether it's true or not, won't even get involved in it. How do people see that? That's my question. Is this woman was crazy? Is her friend is thinking she's crazy? The friend's thinking there's no way. I am sure that many women have been raped by guys who they thought there was no way that guy would rape them. That's when I would say that's one of the major criteria for rape, is that the woman trusts the guy in the first place, not to rape them. And sure enough, guess what? That's exactly what happens. So how does anyone in any society deal with a criminal element that they never would suspect of a crime? Well, we know how they deal with a criminal element that they always suspect of a crime. That we know. And my belief is the answer is very simple. Now, I'm just going to say this is hypothetically an answer, but it's still an answer that we should consider. My hypothetical answer to that question is that white men and white women have established a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours relationship. That is, white men have said to white women, we'll support you, we'll trust you, we'll even bend over backwards to help you and make you feel better, as long as you never accuse us of a crime. As long as you never snitch on us or rat on us or complain about us. We'll take care of you. And the issue here is that when blacks in the United States are marginalized economically, they can't offer anything to compete with that. Okay? And if white, let's say, supremacists, okay, want to perpetuate the philosophy of white supremacy, their easiest target to coerce to go along with it is white women. In a society where white women need to go to men for jobs, need or earn 75% of what men earn when they have a higher income or educational level, when they're more socialized than white men, and white men need white women. Ultimately, they need white women to reject minorities instead of trying to bond with minorities against white male oppression. They make a deal, they cut a deal with white women for their benefit, for both sides. And it's really interesting to think about how this works. When you have a culture of people who are saying, we shouldn't do business with Asians or Asian countries that oppress their own people. How does a white actress deal with a white movie studio that wants to cast her in a role for a movie that's going to be shown to these supposedly oppressive Asians? Knowing how much oppression and how much crap she has to go through to get a job as an actress in Hollywood. How does that work? People should realize that black men have that same dilemma. How do they fight racist oppression in the United States knowing that they need to go to these same racists for a job? That if they don't have a job, they don't have an income, they're not going to be taken seriously, on top of the fact that they're not taken seriously simply because they're black. How does this all work out in the long run when the real power is economic and there's such a difference between having a good job and not having a good job, just as there's a difference between having a good education and not having a good education, or between having a criminal record and not having a criminal record? We live in this culture of exclusion because exclusion is a tool of oppression, and oppression is a tool for success. It's challenging that structure where we benefit by excluding others. That's the answer. We need people to not benefit from excluding others. And we need people to choose not to exclude others by choice, not by force. Because when we talk about bullying in our society and how bullying is a bad thing and all this stuff, and then we still see people getting bullied and we see people committing suicide at a young age, okay, it's very clear that it's a very prevalent problem. But the problem is, how do you stop the problem once it becomes a problem? You have to look at the forces that contribute to it. And if you're not willing to look at those forces square in the eye, you're never going to solve it. And indeed, that problem is going to take you, not you take it. The only route to success in our society is honesty, and to admit our problems, and to admit our hypocrisy. Not to deny it or point fingers at others as a defense. We have to look at our own problems first, and then we can start solving our problems. This entire Republican notion of counter accusations in the face of accusations is as much the problem as anything else. Accusing somebody of something is an act, whether it's in defense or offense, whether it's the primary accusation or the secondary accusation. You don't solve problems by accusing other people of problems. But at the same time, you cannot solve problems if people will not admit those problems. And that works both ways. It works that way for Black Lives Matter as much as it works for Trump supporters. Okay? We can't get past these problems by simply pointing out the problems in other people. We have to look at our own selves also. Left hand without the right hand is not going to get the job done.